Hi everyone. This week we're going to talk about culturally inclusive teaching in counseling. Here's the big question. What are the inherent challenges in teaching future counselors to navigate and embrace cultural diversity? So let's get into it. First, I want to give my thoughts on some of the challenges to navigate answering that big question. So first is I want to talk about remembering with students that you're teaching that self-awareness is hard. Many students have never thought deeply about their own identity or privilege. So when you as the professor come into the classroom and start to introduce this, keep in mind that this is very new for folks. So one thing that I ask my students is, what is your theory of change? What makes people change? So go back to theoretical orientation, right? Not once have I heard a student say, you know what makes people change? Going off on them and shaming them, okay? Unfortunately, when we approach issues such as social justice and DEI, that's the approach I'll see many people take. We have to think about this as a developmental journey and bring our own professional orientation into this work. Because talking about bias, racism can be uncomfortable. And that discomfort is part of the growth. So we need to be comfortable holding that and not taking that away from people. That discomfort is important. And we need to bring our professional identity into it. It's help people through that discomfort. Good counselors reflect on their own stories so they don't unintentionally harm clients. It's a reminder of spending time thinking about how we navigate difference, how we're pre-orientated towards certain things. Keep in mind that teaching self-awareness can be really challenging, especially when we're talking about navigating differences. We also need to think about culture isn't a checklist. So many of your students and counselors in training want to get an A. But when it comes to good multiculturally oriented counseling, there is no right. There are no facts to memorize, maybe concepts to know for sure. But there is no end destination. One thing I've done with students in the past is I've said, okay, here's an A. Now what do you want to do? Keeping in mind that many of our students do take this so seriously that they want to know what's right, what are the rules, how do I make sure it's right? This is a complex topic, and you're having to get folks to accept that there is no right and that every person is unique, even within the same cultural group. So I'll see new students read some of the multicultural texts and then oppose them on individuals. And then at the same time, I'll also see folks reject things. Do you see how you need to keep the complicated kind of middle space? We need to train students to, instead of assuming, ask with a sense of curiosity in values-based questions. Teaching matters too. And who teaches about diversity and how is just as important as what is taught. So I want to name one of the unspoken things in counseling education. You need to keep in mind that no matter what programs do, folks are going to critique it. So let's say you find folks from minoritized backgrounds teaching this course, folks are going to come and critique and say, you're making all the folks do extra labor, which is absolutely true. And then when you have folks like myself come in and teach, you're going to go ahead and say, you're not centering the voices that matter most. Both of those statements are true, which is why I really believe that a lot of us have to teach issues of social justice and navigating difference. I do teach in the multicultural course because it's important that folks from privileged positions also say this is important and it's all of our responsibility to understand it, to teach it, to be involved in it. It's also important to bring in diverse voices in the center of the conversation. If you're looking for the right answer, there is no right answer. But I want to go ahead and name that who teaches that matters. One last thing on this, I will say that over time, I've gotten less complaints, and I don't think it's because I'm amazing. I think it's because of my positionality. So for our fellow colleagues, who come from minoritized backgrounds, we need to really support them when they, as department chair, I do my best to make sure that I am supporting those teachers, affirming their power, because students will sometimes try to triangulate when they feel uncomfortable. We also need to think about like culture isn't in a box, because culture and identity show up everywhere, not just in one class, but in all classes. And I want to share a story with you all that I think highlights this. What are the challenges of teaching? The challenge is that we think about putting it all in one class, but it's all over us all the time. So when I was at a different university, I remember asking the class, maybe 20 students, a question. The first to speak was a man, the second to speak was a man, the third to speak was a man. There's only 3 men in that. Now, what did I do? I said, time. Let's zoom out. For the class, I'm curious. Who spoke first and why? The men didn't speak, but many of the women were quick to share why. My question to some of the women in the room were, why do we allow this to happen? Also, to the men, how have you not noticed this? And do you see how I'm trying to hold the complicated middle? Right? Then it makes for a interesting class, because then everyone's self-conscious about their positionality. But the point is that folks start to discern. They start to discern, how much space am I taking? Maybe for women, they feel more confident that it's okay for me to take more. And for men, maybe recognizing to take a step back. And I also recognize I'm talking in the binary, and that doesn't apply to everybody. Our identities and the cards that we hold influence everything at all times in the classes that we're in. And we have to keep that in mind as we're teaching this. So let's talk about frameworks that you all could use to help with some of these challenges. At this point, you all should be mindful of this and know what this is. So I'm not going to spend too much time unpacking it, because you really should have got a deep understanding of this in your multicultural class that you took in your master's program. If not, make sure to go back and look at the multicultural and social justice counseling competencies. Our professional identity is big into these. Counseling educators created these, and it's really important that you all understand these. If you're like, what are those? This is your moment to do your own kind of work and go back and really understand those. But you want to think about how you can utilize these, since they're from our own professional identity. The first thing I want to talk about is cultural humility. And I was really lucky to be a reviewer for this book, Cultural Humility, in the new edition just coming out while I'm making this video. And there's 3 pillars to it. And I like this model because of its practicality. It's getting folks to think about having cultural humility in everything we do. What is cultural humility? It's staying other focused with a disposition towards curiosity and not knowing. Okay? So you want to think about, how am I engaging in cultural humility? How am I being other focused? How am I being curious? Really having the self-awareness of like, how comfortable am I in this difference? And taking steps to feel more comfortable. Last is cultural opportunities, and I connect this to some of the literature on broaching, being brave and having those brave conversations about identity, but in a relational and natural way. I've seen new counselors come in and be like, you're a person of color and I'm white. How do you think that influences the relationship? I think that is a unnatural way to do that. I love the intent behind it, but how can you do it in a more natural, more rapport building way? The other framework that I want to talk about is the IDI, because I really think that using the IDI can be helpful in helping folks unpack how they're orientated towards navigating difference. And as you can see, there's different stages, from starting with denial, where you miss difference, going into polarization, which is judging differences, going into de-emphasizing differences, which is minimization, going deeply When you deeply comprehend difference, this is acceptance, and then bridging across differences is adaptation. And ideally, we try to get to adaptation. It's where we want to be. So, as counselor educators, I actually think using this framework could be really helpful in terms of helping our counselors in training think about how they're orientated towards difference. So, what I've done is taken this case. A 20-year-old Muslim woman recently moved to the US from Egypt to attend college. She presents with anxiety and depression and shares concerns about being misunderstood, pressured to conform socially around dating, and her desire to stay connected to her religious tradition and identity. So, what might denial look like? It might look like a student counselor saying, I just think they're shy and overwhelmed, and I haven't really thought much about her culture. It doesn't seem that relevant. What might we do if someone's in denial? As a supervisor, we might gently name the lack of cultural awareness without shame, ask big questions like what would it mean to consider the cultural context in her adjustment, and maybe assign reflecting journals to get them to think about culture. What about polarization? Polarization is us versus them. And it could be something like they need to understand that this is how things work in America. American norms are so oppressive. I feel sorry that they have to deal with this. Both of this is polarization. So, how do we respond? They're both polarization, normalize the discomfort, and really get folks out of the either or all or nothing thinking. Minimization, which is actually where most of our students land, is where they say, I treat all my clients the same. I focus on what we have in common rather than dwelling on differences. So, what we want to do, again, praise the intent and expand on the awareness. Ask those big questions. What might get missed if we only focus on the sameness? Then we go into acceptance, where you might hear something like, I want to understand background better. I realize that their experience of anxiety may look different because of the cultural and religious context. And this is where the supervisor might celebrate curiosity, encourage that way of being of maybe not knowing. And then lastly, adaptation, which might look like, hey, I shifted how psychoeducation was delivered to make sure to collaborate to develop the interventions that align with this client. So we're adapting to the cultural background of our clients. And that's where we can pick up on culture. Culture is patterns of behavior, and make sure that we're shifting so that we really meet the needs of our clients. So, last slide is this. And things that we might want to do. So, if you come across denial, how might cultural context be influenced their experience of anxiety, polarization, what makes this issue feel emotionally charged for you? Minimization, what aspects of their identity might you be unintentionally overlooking? Acceptance, how can you use this insight in case conceptualization and treatment planning? And adaptation, how are you shifting your own behavior to be more culturally attuned? So if you see a counselor in training orientated in one of those ways, you can ask a big open-ended question to get them thinking, to tune into themselves so that you can help. Thank you all, and I look forward to engaging in the conversations as we keep going.